Hello and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. So, in Bristol, a statue of a slave trader called Edward Colston was toppled by anti-racism protesters. And Turning Points UK, which is the UK arm of a far-right, reactionary, crazy American media organisation founded, I believe, by a guy called Charlie Kirk, who's nuts, a sort of far-right Christian maniac. And they're trying to spread their stuff over here. Anyway, Turning Points UK has sent someone to the scene to interview anyone that they can find who supports their opinions. So is it a situation of people trying to erase history and versus people who want to preserve it? Is that what's going on, or is it something else? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's jump in and see what sort of person they've managed to find to nod along to their mad throwback opinions, shall we? Let's jump straight into it.
Hi, Padfield here. Gentleman's just been accosted by two individuals and they're not interested in discussion, they're just interested in their propaganda while saying that we are forcing our propaganda, which doesn't lead to anything good.
And that is largely probably how you should handle Turning Points UK or Turning Point at all. Don't engage, because they will just edit what you say into something that serves their own propaganda. So those people who declined comment and weren't interested in discussion, good on them. That's exactly what you absolutely should do. And notice the sort of Weasley words, the way he describes those two people as having accosted this man. Now, what does accosted mean specifically? It basically just means to talk to someone, and without any context around what this situation was or what the other people had to say or anything like that, we can only assume that it was basically nothing, that it was a big nothing. But they're trying to present it as if it was some kind of, almost criminal act of yobs. But that seems extremely unlikely, because if he was attacked by yobs, the first thing you would do is probably not take an interview with Turning Points UK. You're far more likely to be, calling the police or something. I don't know.
Padfield has agreed to a 30-second-minute interview.
I was in the forces just after the Second World War, and the Royal Engineers.
What are your thoughts on the fact that a mob of 200 to 300 people tore down the statue?
I think it was absolutely disgusting. I'd have put the lot away or chucked them in the dock myself if I'd had my way.
Yeah, what do you expect? I mean, this Padfield guy, he's pretty old. He's like pretty much your stereotype of an old conservative bloke from the UK, He doesn't have any idea what's going on. Why are you asking him about his opinion? To be honest, why does it matter? And in general, this is what a modern day British conservative looks like. Extremely old and out of touch with what's going on today. They were raised essentially in a different culture, and I would go so far as to say a worse culture, with punitive measures for people stepping out of line from the conformity of the status quo. And that created this kind of anger in them, that they were punished for stepping outside of the conformist status quo, and then they get annoyed about other people doing so. Well, the solution isn't to punish those people. The solution is, well, really, those old people shouldn't have been punished. They should have been free to do what they wanted to. That's a much better solution. But this guy's old. He's pretty much past educating on this subject. But okay, of course, new generations think differently from old generations. That's how, we progress. And of course, if you ask a really old guy, he's going to have some really outdated opinions, for the most part. It's very unsurprising that this guy, whose heyday was the 50s, is going to have a 1950s opinion.
So, in terms of, I agree with you, because I don't believe in mob rule, I believe in the rule of law.
Well, it's no surprise that this Turning Points UK guy agrees with this guy from the 1950s, is it? Because literally that's where his opinions are from. He might look like a sort of youngish, hipstery type, but really you scratch the surface and it's like that Spider-Man meme with the three Spider-Men pointing at each other. It's like, yeah, no shit, you agree. You're literally the same person. Also, for a modern conservative still claiming that you believe in the rule of law and not mob rule. Oh yeah? Really? How do you feel about January 6th? How do you feel about the attempted overthrow of American democracy by right-wing head cases? How do you feel about that? Because my guess is you quite liked it. Also, I wonder how you feel about the Canadian trucker white supremacist convoy blocking the border. My guess is pretty positively. So no, you're not in favour of the law. Not really. Not in the way that the rest of us mean the law. What you're in favour of is the rules, which is different from the law. Because the law kind of evolves, has to be done by a jury and people, but the rules are basically your traditions. They're completely irrational. They're just kind of like, you know, similar to this old guy thinking that anyone who steps out of line of conformity should be punished. People should accept their place in the grueling hierarchy and not step out of line. That's what really you're in favour of. And when it comes to mobs going nuts, if those mobs are in favour of the mad stuff that you're in favour of, I reckon you'd probably quite like those mobs. But this categorising of anything that the left does as mob rule, what it really is just admitting basically that what you want to happen is deeply unpopular, and that, like, to call something a mob really just means there's lots of people who agree with that. It's a sort of rebranding on, like, democracy, essentially, to try and make democracy and the democratic process sound bad, because when you got no chance of winning it, you gotta do that sort of thing, don't you?
Is your sentiment one of that?
Absolutely. And I've been on the wrong side of the law through no fault of my own.
So even this old guy accepts that sometimes, through no fault of your own, you can be on the wrong side of the law, demonstrating that under some circumstances he believes that the law can be unjust. So he doesn't really believe in the rule of law, you know, he just only believes in it when it's enforced in, like, against the people that he doesn't like, because they are they don't fit the mould of what his sort of conformist idea of culture and society should look like. You know, like men with long hair, women with short hair, people with tattoos and piercings, brown people, stuff like that.
But I still think the law is what it's... If you want...
Good old British public. Now, if you weren't able to pick out what that was a guy just quickly pulling up on a bike and saying, "Nutter!" to these people. My guess is he probably doesn't know particularly who Turning Point UK are, but my guess is that these people have been doing stuff, you know, in this area and causing trouble already, and that's how this guy knows who he is. And my guess is this altercation that the old guy had with some presumably protesters or young people is what alerted this guy, this cyclist, this brave hero to this old guy's intention. So whatever happened before this, which presumably Turning Point could have filmed, I imagine, but for some reason opted not to show, I think we all know why that is, has led random members of the British public to just cycle over and say, "Nutter!"
If you want to protest, make the protest correctly and have your say.
And do it in a way that can be completely and easily ignorable by everyone else, so it has no impact whatsoever.
They mightn't agree with what the person has done, but it's our history. Whether we like it or not at times, it's our history.
Yeah, and you know where history belongs? In a f***ing museum. Because in a museum, you can display it in context of it being history. But putting a statue of some horrible bastard right in the middle of a public square, a public space, is not relegating it to history. It's celebrating it today. That's the issue. And when the descendants of people who suffered under the behaviour of that person who's being celebrated have to walk past it every single day, it's just an insult to them. It's a constant insult. You know, it's not like in Germany they have statues of Hitler in their town squares, is it? They've taken that shit down. If you want to see that sort of stuff, you've got to go into a museum where history is. You know, and the truth is, this isn't some well thought out agenda. You know, this old guy, he's not really, you know, rationally thinking through what this means and other people's perspective on it. He's just not. All he's doing is like a prejudicial knee-jerk reaction. He sees a bunch of alternative looking youngsters being being rambunctious in public, and he wants to wave his fist at them and tell them to stop. You know, and in the UK, unfortunately, this is a major voting bloc that the Conservative Party has courted all this time, because these old codgers, they've got a lot of spare time on their hands, and they go and vote, and they vote for these sorts of stupid things. Now, the Turning Point's UK guy, he doesn't really care about, you know, mobs getting rambunctious in public in the same way that this old guy does. He doesn't. And, you know, he similarly doesn't really care about, like, history being, like, removed, you know? I mean, something tells me if it was a statue of Martin Luther King being taken down, for example, he wouldn't have a problem with it. The real problem he's got is these statues of people that are being torn down because they're celebrating bad guys. His problem with it is that he wants to celebrate those bad guys, and he sees these statues being torn down as a kind of symbolic representation of the ideology that he supports crumbling and falling away into history. He doesn't want these statues to be taken down from the public square and put into the museum, because he wants that ideology presented out there today, being celebrated today. He doesn't want it to be relegated to history. And that's what this really is about. It's not about people trying to destroy history. That's absurd. You can't destroy history. That's just like a meaningless sentence, to destroy history. It doesn't mean anything. What it's actually about is a battle between one group who wants to make something into history, and the other that wants to keep that history not as history, but as something that's ongoing today. It's essentially a war between the past and the future. And you know who always wins that? The future. Because the future's coming, regardless of what anyone wants, you know? Because that's just the direction that time flows. And that really is what this whole thing is about. The last gasp, the swan song of a dying culture, kicking and screaming as it goes the way of the dinosaurs. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. Hippie hyena out. Goodbye.